The clock strikes midnight in downtown Sacramento as James Freeman rubs his tired eyes, gathering his papers from the Marathon City Council budget meeting. The empty chamber still echoes with heated debates about infrastructure funding and public works projects. As head of the Police Oversight Committee, he'd spent hours defending the need for additional training resources, only to face pushback from budget-conscious colleagues. Outside, the winter air bites through his suit jacket. Large snowflakes fall silently around him as he hurries across the parking lot, his leather shoes crunching through fresh powder. The meteorologist had predicted the first major storm of the season, and for once, they were right. James clicks his key fob, and his silver sit-in chirps in response, its windows already frosted over. Inside the car, he cranks up the heat and checks his phone. 3 missed calls from his wife, Sarah, and a text reminding him about tomorrow's parent-teacher conference for their daughter Emma. Being a public servant means missing more family moments than he'd like, but Sarah understands. She always has, even during his early days as a community organizer when the pay was low and the hours were worse. As James pulls onto Capitol Avenue, his mind wanders to tomorrow's agenda. The police department's quarterly review is due, and preliminary numbers suggest an uptick in use of force incidents. Nothing major, but enough to warrant discussion. He makes a mental note to request additional data from Chief Thompson's office. The streets are empty save for a few plows preparing for the overnight accumulation. James follows his usual route home, past the darkened storefronts and silent office buildings. At this hour, Sacramento feels like a different city, peaceful, almost serene. The snowfall muffles the usual urban soundtrack, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. Near the intersection of 16th Street, James notices movement in his rearview mirror. Red and blue lights suddenly pierce the darkness, reflecting off the falling snow in a disorienting display. He checks his speedometer, 28 in a 30 zone. His registration is current, and he'd just had the car serviced last week. Pulling over to the curb, James positions his car carefully away from a snowbank. He retrieves his license and registration from the glove compartment, then places both hands on the steering wheel, a habit ingrained from years of working with law enforcement reform advocates. Through his side mirror, he watches 2 officers approach, their flashlight beams bouncing through the snowfall. The tap on his window is unnecessarily loud. James presses the button, and cold air rushes in along with the beam of a flashlight aimed directly at his face. The officer leans down, revealing a young face topped with a dusting of snow. His nameplate reads Sullivan. License and registration. Sullivan demands, his tone carrying an edge that sets off warning bells in James's mind. This isn't the professional courtesy he's come to expect from Sacramento PD. James hands over his documents, noting the second officer, Martinez, according to his nameplate, positioning himself by the trunk. Both officers seem young, probably no more than a few years on the force. In his role as oversight chairman, James makes it a point to know most of the department veterans, but these faces are unfamiliar. "Step out of the vehicle," Sullivan orders, already reaching for the door handle. "May I ask why?" James keeps his voice steady. "Professional. I wasn't speeding, and all my documentation is in order." "Taillights out," Martinez calls from behind. "And we need to conduct a field sobriety test." James knows with absolute certainty that his taillights are functioning perfectly. He'd watched their reflection in the store windows during his drive. But as snowflakes continue to fall and the temperature drops, he realizes this routine traffic stop is about to become anything but routine. Officers Sullivan and Martinez flank James as he stands in the accumulating snow, their breath creating ghostly clouds in the beam of their flashlights. The wind has picked up, driving icy particles against their faces, but neither officer seems bothered. Sullivan hands back James's license with a dismissive flick of his wrist, deliberately letting it fall into the slush. "You know, we could write you up for that taillight," Sullivan says, exchanging a knowing look with his partner. "That's a $250 fine, plus mandatory inspection." He pauses, letting the threat hang in the frigid air. But maybe we can work something out. James bends down to retrieve his now-soaked license, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. In his 15 years of public service, he's dealt with all types of law enforcement officers, the dedicated, the burnt-out, the corrupt. These two, with their practiced intimidation and casual disregard for procedure, set off every alarm bell in his experience. The taillight was working perfectly when I left City Hall, James states calmly, though his heart pounds against his ribs. You're welcome to inspect it again. He knows challenging them directly could escalate the situation, but he can't help testing their response. Martin circles behind James, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. Pretty nice suit you've got there, he remarks, brushing imaginary dust from James's shoulder with exaggerated care. Shame if it got dirty. Through the swirling snow, James notices a diner across the street. Its security camera, partially visible under an awning, points directly at their location. He files this detail away, even as Sullivan steps closer, invading his personal space. Here's the deal, Sullivan says, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. 20 push-ups, right here, right now, and we forget about the taillight. Consider it our Christmas gift to you. He pulls out his personal phone, already opening the camera app. James weighs his options. As oversight chairman, he could identify himself. That might provoke an even worse response. These officers, drunk on their own authority, clearly haven't bothered to run his name through their system. Filing a complaint later would be his safest course of action. Is this standard procedure for traffic stops now? James asks, watching Martinez also pull out his phone. I don't recall this being in the department manual. Sullivan's smile vanishes. Manual says we can conduct field sobriety tests. This is just our creative interpretation. Unless you prefer spending the night explaining yourself downtown. The threat isn't subtle. James thinks of his family waiting at home, of Emma's parent-teacher conference tomorrow. His hands clench involuntarily at his sides. Every principle he's fought for in his career screams against submitting to this abuse of power, but he recognizes the dangerous glint in Sullivan's eyes. Some battles need to be fought strategically. 20 push-ups, you said. James confirms, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. He can see both officers already grinning, their phones raised to capture their entertainment for the night. Nice and slow, Martinez adds, so we can get good footage. Maybe we'll even make you famous on social media. As James removes his suit jacket, the freezing wind cuts through his dress shirt. Snowflakes immediately begin dotting the light blue fabric. He folds the jacket carefully, placing it on his car's hood, conscious of the security camera still recording across the street. Sometimes, he reminds himself, the most powerful moves in chess require sacrificing a piece. Sullivan gestures impatiently to the ground, his phone ready. Time's wasting. Suit man. Let's see what you've got. The asphalt beneath James's palms burns with cold as he assumes the push-up position. Slush immediately seeps through his dress shirt, the icy water reaching his skin. His leather shoes struggle to find grip on the snow-covered road as he positions his feet. Above him, Sullivan and Martinez circle like vultures, their phone cameras capturing every moment of his humiliation. 1. Sullivan calls out with exaggerated enthusiasm. Come on, old man. Get lower than that. We want to see your chest touch the ground. James complies, lowering himself until his tie drags through the dirty slush. His muscles protest against the cold and the awkward position. As he pushes back up, a passing car slows down, its headlights illuminating the scene. The driver honks once, perhaps in solidarity, perhaps in mockery. James keeps his eyes fixed on the ground, focusing on his breathing. 2, 3. Martinez counts, deliberately slow. Maybe we should make him start over. That last one looked a little weak. Melting snow drits from James's forehead as he continues the degrading exercise. His fingers begin to lose sensation where they press against the freezing ground. The wind whips around him, carrying the sound of the officer's laughter across the empty street. Through his peripheral vision, he catches the red light of the diner's security camera still blinking steadily. 10. Sullivan announces, though James has done at least 15. Not even halfway there. Hey, Martinez, you think we should make him sing while he does these? You know, add some entertainment value. James's arms tremble, more from suppressed anger than exhaustion. He thinks of his son, Kevin, who dreams of becoming a police officer, who believes in the nobility of the badge. How would he react seeing his father forced to perform like a circus animal for the amusement of corrupt cops? A semi-truck rumbles past, its driver laying on the horn at the sight of a well-dressed man doing push-ups in the snow while two officers film with their phones. The blast of air from its passing peppers James's face with road salt and ice. Still, he maintains his rhythm, each push-up bringing him closer to the end of this ordeal, and closer to the reckoning he's already planning. 15, calls Martinez, though James counts 22 in his head. The officer kicks some slush toward him, spattering James's shirt with gray snow. 5 more to go, suit man. Make them pretty for the camera. James's fingers have gone completely numb, and his white dress shirt is now translucent with moisture. The tie he wore to the council meeting, a Father's Day gift from Emma, drags through the mess with each repetition. He channels his humiliation into mental notes. Their badge numbers, the timestamp from the bank's digital display across the street, the specific words they're using. 20. Sullivan finally announces, "Now that wasn't so bad, was it? Consider your ticket taken care of." He steps closer, his boots entering James's field of vision. "And hey, if anyone asks, you were practicing your fitness routine. We just stopped to make sure you were okay." James pushes himself up slowly, his wet clothes immediately stiffening in the freezing air. He retrieves his suit jacket from the car hood, now dusted with snow. His entire body trembles, though whether from cold or rage, he's no longer sure. The officers return to their patrol car, still laughing, still reviewing their footage. "Stay warm out there, fitness enthusiast." Martinez calls out as they pull away, their taillights disappearing into the swirling snow. James stands alone on the roadside, his ruined suit dripping onto the asphalt, and begins to plan. In the records department's fluorescent-lit basement, James arrives precisely at 8 a.m. when Nancy, the veteran clerk who's run this office for 20 years, unlocks the doors. She greets him with her usual warmth, but her smile fades seeing his expression. "Nancy, I need everything you have on Officers Sullivan and Martinez," James says, sliding his counsel credentials across the counter. "Personnel files, complaint records, transfer paperwork, all of it." "Give me a minute," Nancy replies, recognizing the gravity in his tone. She disappears into the labyrinth of filing cabinets, her sensible shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. While waiting, James calls Joe's Diner across from last night's incident. The owner, an early riser named Frank, answers on the second ring. "Those cameras of yours still working, Frank?" James asks, keeping his voice steady. "I need the footage from around midnight. For you, Mr. Freeman. I'll have it ready in 20. Frank's response confirms what James has long believed. Building community relationships matters. "Saw something strange last night through the window. Guess that was you out there." Nancy returns with 2 thick folders, her usually cheerful face now serious. "You might want to sit down for these," she says, gesturing to a nearby desk. "And you should know, someone already tried accessing these files electronically at 6 a.m. today." James opens Sullivan's file first, and the pattern emerges immediately. 3 excessive force complaints in his previous department, all involving similar humiliation tactics. Transferred after a 4th incident was misplaced in the system. Martinez's record mirrors his partner's, multiple infractions, all buried under administrative sleight of hand. His phone vibrates, a text from Frank. Footage is clear as day. Shows everything, including their patrol car number. Want me to make copies? James is about to respond when Nancy clears her throat. There's more, she says, pulling out another folder. These officers were specifically requested by Captain Reynolds. The transfer paperwork was rushed through last month. Reynolds, the same captain who opposed James's push for mandatory body cameras. The pieces start falling into place. James photographs key pages from the personnel files, careful to include date stamps and signature lines. His hand shakes slightly, not from last night's cold, but from growing anger at the systemic nature of the problem. Nancy, I need these files secured, he says, closing the folders. No one views them without going through me first. Understood. She nods, already moving to lock them in her personal cabinet. After 20 years, she knows which way the wind blows. James crosses the street to Joe's Diner, where Frank meets him at the door with a USB drive. Got it from 3 angles, Frank says, leading him to the security office. Sound 2. They forgot about our new system. On Frank's monitor, the scene plays out in sharp digital clarity. The officers' faces clearly visible, their badges legible, their phones recording as James performs push-ups in the snow. But more importantly, the footage shows his functioning taillights, proving the stop was baseless. James copies the files to his phone, then sends everything: personnel records, diner footage, the truck driver's dash cam post, to his secure counsel email. By 9 a.m., he has enough evidence to end not just 2 careers, but to expose an entire network of departmental corruption. As he walks towards City Hall, his phone rings. Judge Santos returning his early morning email. James, she says without preamble, I'm calling an emergency oversight meeting. How soon can you present your findings? James checks his watch, allowing himself the first smile since last night. Give me an hour to prepare. This needs to be done right. The council chamber fills quickly as word spreads about the emergency session. James stands at the podium, his laptop connected to the room's main display screen. He's changed into a fresh suit, but the memory of last night's frozen asphalt still burns in his palms. Chief Thompson sits in the front row, his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous finger-tapping. Captain Reynolds is notably absent, having called in sick minutes after receiving the meeting notification. Judge Santos takes her place at the Oversight Committee's table, her expression grave as she reviews the evidence packet James prepared. Before we begin, James starts, his voice carrying through the hushed chamber. I want to make something clear. This isn't just about 2 officers abusing their power. This is about a system that enabled them, protected them, and deliberately placed them in our community. The first image appears on screen, his functioning taillights clearly visible in the diner's security footage. The timestamp glows in the corner. 12:07 a.m. Next comes the traffic stop, captured in high definition from multiple angles. Several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats as they watch their oversight chairman forced to the ground. Officers Sullivan and Martinez have a history, James continues, switching to their personnel files. 15 combined complaints in their previous department, all buried, all involving similar intimidation tactics. He pauses, letting the pattern sink in. And then this. The transfer paperwork appears on screen, showing Captain Reynolds' signature and Chief Thompson's hasty approval. James highlights the dates, the rushed processing, the convenient omission of their disciplinary records. Chief Thompson. James turns to face him directly. Did you review these officers' full records before approving their transfer? Thompson's face reddens. I trusted my captain's recommendation. He manages, but the excuse sounds hollow even to his own ears. The chamber erupts in murmurs as James displays more evidence. The social media post from the truck driver, time-stamped photos of his ruined clothes, and finally, the officer's own phone recordings of the incident, obtained through an emergency subpoena Judge Santos issued this morning. These officers weren't just bad apples, James declares, his voice rising with controlled anger. They were specifically selected and brought here by officials who knew their history, who counted on their willingness to intimidate and abuse, who thought their actions would never face scrutiny. The evidence is irrefutable. Chief Thompson stares at the floor, his career crumbling before him. Several council members are already drafting motions on their laptops. Journalists in the back of the room type frantically, tomorrow's headlines practically writing themselves. I move for immediate termination of Officers Sullivan and Martinez, Judge Santos announces, her voice cutting through the tension. Furthermore, I recommend a full investigation into Captain Reynolds' recruitment practices and Chief Thompson's oversight failures. James watches the votes appear on the chamber's digital display. Unanimous. His hands still tingle from the cold ground, but satisfaction begins to replace the anger. This isn't just about personal revenge. It's about fixing a broken system. Have Officers Sullivan and Martinez arrived? Judge Santos asks the chamber sergeant. They're waiting outside, Your Honor, along with their union representative. James gathers his materials, preparing for the next phase. In a few minutes, those officers will walk through those doors, expecting a routine disciplinary hearing. Instead, they'll face the full consequences of their actions, captured in high definition from multiple angles. Send them in, James says, taking his seat at the Oversight Committee's table, and make sure their body cameras are on. We wouldn't want to miss anything. Sullivan and Martinez enter the chamber like swagger personified, their pressed uniforms and polished badges a stark contrast to the drenched suit they'd mocked hours earlier. Their union representative, a seasoned veteran named Mike Walsh, follows with a thick folder of precedent cases, standard ammunition for negotiating reduced disciplinary actions. The chamber falls silent. Even the journalists stop typing, sensing the weight of the moment. James watches the officers' faces as they scan the room, noting the exact second they recognize him. Sullivan's step falters. Martinez's complexion turns ashen. Officers, Judge Santos begins, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years on the bench. Please take your seats at the respondents' table. She gestures to chairs positioned directly facing the large display screen, still frozen on an image of James doing push-ups in the snow. Walsh leans forward, finally grasping the severity of the situation. Your Honor, if I might request a brief recess to confer with my clients. Denied. Santos cuts him off. This hearing has been properly noticed and will proceed. She nods to James. Mr. Freeman, please continue your presentation. James rises slowly, savoring the growing panic in Sullivan's eyes. Let's review the events of last night, shall we? He clicks to the first video clip. Here we see my vehicle being pulled over for an allegedly broken taillight. The footage clearly shows his functioning lights. Martinez shifts in his seat, his hand unconsciously moving to the phone in his pocket. The same phone that had recorded his own misconduct. Both officers watch in horror as multiple camera angles reveal their abuse of power in pristine clarity. Your Honor, Walsh tries again. My clients were merely. Merely what? James interrupts, his voice sharp. Merely forcing a citizen to perform exercises at midnight in freezing temperatures. Merely recording it for their entertainment. Or merely continuing a pattern of behavior documented across multiple departments. He displays their personnel files, highlighting complaint after complaint. Sullivan's leg bounces nervously under the table. Martinez stares straight ahead, his jaw clenched. But here's what's truly interesting. James continues, pulling up the transfer paperwork. You weren't randomly assigned to our department, were you? Captain Reynolds specifically requested you. He knew your history, knew your tactics, and brought you here anyway. The union representative closes his folder, recognizing a lost cause. In the gallery, Chief Thompson seems to shrink in his seat as James outlines the department's complicity in enabling these officers. Your badges, Judge Santos suddenly commands, her tone brooking no argument. Place them on the table. Sullivan's hands shake as he unpins his shield. Martinez takes longer, his fingers lingering on the metal as if trying to memorize its weight one last time. The Oversight Committee has voted unanimously for your immediate termination, Santos announces, Furthermore, the district attorney's office will be reviewing this incident for possible criminal charges related to civil rights violations. The officers sit in stunned silence as Santos continues listing the consequences: pension forfeiture, mandatory reporting to the state certification board, prohibition from future law enforcement employment in the state. You have the right to appeal this decision, Santos concludes, though I strongly advise against it, given the evidence. Sergeant, please escort the former officers from the building. Their personal effects will be shipped to their homes. As Sullivan and Martinez are led out, their shoulders slumped in defeat, James remembers something. Officers, he calls after them. One last thing. They turn, faces drawn. Next time you want someone to exercise, James says, his voice carrying across the chamber, I suggest you lead by example. The chamber doors closed behind them with a final heavy thud. The story breaks across local media like wildfire. By evening, every news station in Sacramento leads with the footage of a city council member forced to do push-ups by officers who didn't realize who he was. Social media explodes with the incident, sparking a nationwide conversation about police accountability and abuse of power. James sits in his office, watching the coverage unfold on multiple screens. His phone hasn't stopped buzzing with messages from reporters, reform advocates, and fellow officials from other cities facing similar issues. But it's the email from a local teenager that catches his attention. Mr. Freeman, I saw what those officers did to you. Last month, they made my brother do jumping jacks in the rain. We were too scared to report it. Thank you for standing up to them. More stories begin pouring in. Similar incidents, different officers, same fear of reporting. James starts compiling them, building a comprehensive picture of departmental culture that extends beyond two rogue officers. Each testimony strengthens his resolve for what comes next. 3 days after the terminations, James presents a comprehensive reform package to the city council. The chambers are packed, with citizens spilling into the hallways. His son Kevin sits in the front row, still processing how his view of law enforcement has been challenged and reshaped. What happened to me was not unique, James begins, his voice steady. I was simply in a position to do something about it. But reform isn't about revenge. It's about prevention. It's about building a department that truly serves and protects. The package includes mandatory body camera activation during all citizen interactions, with tampering classified as a firing offense. A civilian review board with real power, not just advisory capacity. Psychological screening for transfer officers. Anti-retaliation protections for whistleblowers. 6 months later, the changes are evident. Body camera compliance hits 100%. Civilian complaints drop by 40%. The department's new leadership, selected through a transparent community process, implements enhanced training focused on de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. Captain Reynolds resigns before his investigation concludes. Chief Thompson takes early retirement. The old guard gives way to officers who embrace accountability, who understand that authority comes with responsibility. The diner across from the incident becomes an unofficial landmark. Frank, the owner, frames a photo of his security cameras on the wall. The eyes that saw justice. The caption reads, "Officers who stop there for coffee pass it every day." A quiet reminder of accountability. James keeps the ruined suit in his office closet. Emma's stained tie hangs beside it, not as trophies, but as reminders that change often comes at a personal cost, and that sometimes humiliation can be transformed into progress. 1 year after the incident, James stands before a new class of police academy graduates. Among them is a familiar face, the brother of the teenager who first emailed him, now pursuing his dream of becoming the kind of officer his community needs. Your badge is not a shield from accountability, James tells them. It's a symbol of public trust. Every interaction, every decision, every moment of every shift should honor that trust. The graduates nod, their fresh badges catching the light. In the audience, Sullivan and Martinez's former patrol car sits in the academy parking lot, repurposed for training. A new message is painted on its side. integrity first. James straightens his tie, a new one, another gift from Emma, and sees hope in these fresh faces. The incident that began with push-ups in the snow has pushed an entire department toward positive change, one reform at a time. 2 years after the infamous push-up incident, Sacramento's police department has become a model for reform across the nation. Departments from Los Angeles to Boston send representatives to study their transformation, and James frequently travels to share their success story at law enforcement conferences. The changes run deeper than just policy. Officers now regularly participate in community events, not as authority figures but as neighbors. The annual police community basketball tournament draws huge crowds, with Officer Maria Chen, who replaced Sullivan, coaching the youth team in her spare time. The department's transparency website, showing real-time data on stops, complaints, and resolutions, becomes a template for agencies nationwide. James walks through the renovated police headquarters, now featuring a public reception area where citizens can file complaints or commendations without intimidation. The walls display photos of officers engaged in community service, reading to elementary school students, helping elderly residents with groceries, organizing neighborhood cleanups. His phone buzzes with a text from Kevin, who is now in his final year at the police academy. "Dad, you should see this." Attached is a photo of the Academy's new ethics training manual. The cover features a simple quote, "Authority without accountability is not service, it's oppression." In the break room, James encounters Officer Martinez's replacement, David Turner, having coffee with the same truck driver who witnessed the original incident. They're discussing the driver's new role on the Civilian Oversight Board, proof that bridges can be built between law enforcement and the community they serve. The department's annual review shows the cultural shift in numbers. Excessive force complaints down 85%, community trust ratings up 73%, officer satisfaction scores at record highs. The mandatory body camera policy, once contested, is now embraced by officers who appreciate how footage protects both them and civilians from false accusations. Sarah organizes monthly dinners where officers and community members share meals and stories. At the latest gathering, an elderly woman who once feared police brings homemade cookies to her neighborhood patrol officer. Small gestures, but they represent seismic shifts in community relations. James still receives emails from other cities facing similar challenges. He responds to each one, sharing Sacramento's experience, while acknowledging that reform is never one-size-fits-all. The key, he writes, is making accountability and community trust the foundation, not an afterthought. The diner's security cameras, which captured the catalyst for change, now form part of a larger network of public safety monitoring, jointly overseen by police and civilian representatives. Frank's Eyes That Saw Justice photo has been joined by dozens of community awards celebrating the department's transformation. On the anniversary of the incident, James visits the spot where he did those push-ups. It's different now. A small park with a plaque reading "Every challenge is an opportunity for change." Children play while an officer teaches bicycle safety nearby, the scene a perfect contrast to that cold night 2 years ago. The ruined suit and tie remain in his office, but they're now accompanied by letters from citizens sharing positive interactions with police, photos of community events, and certificates from departments nationwide adopting Sacramento's reforms. As James prepares to leave his oversight role, confident in the sustainable changes they've built, he receives one final email. It's from a retired Officer Sullivan, who writes, "You could have just sought revenge, but you chose to create real change instead. I was wrong that night, and what you've built here proves it. Thank you for making us better." James smiles, closes his laptop, and heads to Kevin's academy graduation, where a new generation of officers awaits, ready to serve their community with integrity, accountability, and respect.